So my name's Charlie Fleetum. I am the facilitator for today's festivities. As Miss Tracy said on the way in, so this is meeting 5. When does 6, 7, and 8 get scheduled? Of course, we could go way beyond 6, 7, and 8, couldn't we, Brian? But what we're going to try to do today in terms of desired outcomes is present the final report plan to you and try to describe the rationale and thinking behind some of the critical parts of that plan, and B, give you an opportunity to provide comments and ask questions. So those are our primary objectives for today. I'm going to start by asking Crescent to update us on city activities, and then we'll move to the rest of the agenda. Just as far as process, we'll be passing around the mic. If you have comments, we need it for the video. All right, Crescent?
Thank you, Charlie. So again, welcome everybody, and thank you all for your continued participation with the advisory committee in this, as Charlie said, our fifth and final meeting. We all on the team certainly appreciate all your efforts and time over the past several months in helping to form and shape our plan. You and all of the stakeholders, you're definitely a key group, but also keep in mind lots of other stakeholders have been involved too, including the initial stakeholder interviewees and the Downtown Business Focus Group, which included a lot of you already, so you've worn multiple hats. But also the residents who participated in our scientific phone survey, the Environmental Commission as a body. We've met with them a couple of times, and we'll be going back with them here shortly, and I'll touch on that at the end of the meeting. And city staff as well, because there's staff outside of the core team that are involved in the process of our solid waste programs that have been very integral to this. And all of those folks have assisted in the development of this plan that's intended and headed to optimize, enhance, and expand the solid waste programs that we offer and provide to the Ann Arbor community. So this plan, with its analysis and implementation strategy and the financial model tool that's coming along with it, is going to be able to be utilized by the city going forward to move our programs forward. So for all that help and effort in getting this together and also looking ahead to move it forward, I want to thank you very much for all that help. So as Charlie said, my usual role here is to provide some updates of things related to the program area, the plan itself, just to keep everyone up to speed. So the first item, I've been keeping the group informed in terms of the status of our current contracts. We got 3 main contracts, major contracts in our collections and processing area that have had timing implications related to the project here in the plan. And as an update, on June 3rd, City Council approved amendments to each of those 3 contracts to extend their term, their duration, to the end of this now current fiscal year, June 30th of 2020. So we've got a contract with Waste Management of Michigan for our commercial waste collection franchise, and 2 contracts with Recycle Ann Arbor, one for collecting the recyclables through town, and our processing of our recyclables through our MRF and that process. So those are now in place. Another item that was touched on at our last meeting in May, I had noted to the group that the city had received an updated submittal from Recycle Ann Arbor regarding restarting the MRF. And as an update to that, following a review of that submittal, there were quite a few questions and areas of uncertainty from the city staff review's perspective that prevented the submittal from advancing and going forward. So instead, city staff is now preparing an RFP, or request for proposals, that we're looking to put out on the street, because that contract, again, though it's extended, it's going to be expiring, and these things take some time to get put in place. So we're going to be soliciting proposals from parties to process our recyclables and allow them to provide pricing and evaluation on one similar to the operation today, where the recyclables are offloaded at our MRF facility and then transloaded to another MRF for processing. But part of the evaluation is going to be where are those processing MRFs, getting real specific information so we can see what are those distances, what are those impacts, what are those costs, because that's one of the continuing concerns we've had is with the material going the distance that it has been. And also to specifically and in a guided way get information and pricing proposals from those that are willing and interested in restarting the MRF to basically deal with the old equipment that's no longer functioning and replace it, and to build that into the cost calculations, and so that those can be evaluated across all those proposals. So that work has been going on in the background by myself and the team, and is getting ready to go out here hopefully by the end of this week to keep us moving forward on that. And
why can't this city do its own recycling rather than contract?
the short answer is the city's always contracted it out. We've never had the resources to do that, and that's been a contracted operation. And that's a very small and brief answer. We can get into more of that, but that's the approach we've been taking in the past, all the way through.
Hey, Preston, could you just repeat the question?
Oh, sorry, yep, because it wasn't on the mic. The question was asked, why can't the city, or why doesn't the city actually perform the processing and just do the work ourselves with our own staff and resources? So, thank you, Charlie. I wasn't quick enough to hand the mic out. And then the third item as an update that I've been keeping the group informed and aware of is the status of the new regional authority that's being formed, WARMA, and to update folks on the status of that. July 11th, a meeting was held with the representatives from the 7 communities that have signed on and voted to adopt the Articles of Incorporation, basically join WARMA. And since there is a process to officially establish a new authority, filing of papers and things with the state, posting of legal notice, this was an unofficial meeting. They haven't formed, but the outcome of that meeting was that the group decided they felt they should move forward and establish themselves as an authority. So the papers are being filed, and WARMA is getting established. So the approximate timeline for that is 30 to 60 days, and my understanding is sometime in September is the target anticipated date for the first official meeting of the WARMA board in its current state. So that's it for my update items, and get ready to turn it over to Charlie to walk us through the agenda. But before that, just like to say a few things about the draft plan. Charlie touched on it a little bit, but first, I want to thank the many people that have already reviewed the plan in detail. I know it's a lot of material, a lot of technical, it's dense, it's heavy. Not the sort of thing you want to read out at the lakeshore on the back of the deck with I don't know, maybe a glass of wine might help sometimes with some of this, but appreciate all those that went through it and provided us comments and feedback. So that feedback, those comments are going to be collated, assembled, and included in the final document. And secondly, just kind of as a reminder and really restatement of the plan itself is some of the comments in terms of some of the form and content of the plan. That the plan where we've stated, and it is a strategic plan, setting the strategic direction. It's not your standard strategic plan and process in that the city didn't put out the solid, big, hairy goals, if you will, of the solid waste program and ask the consultant team to give us a how-to or how do we get there approach. We specifically asked the consultant, as we have issues, things that were being brought to us by the community, aspects and sectors of the community around the programs, that we specifically asked the consultant to come in and study and analyze our current operations and identify and look for opportunities to improve those operations and service delivery. How do we do our job better, more effectively, and move us forward and expand those programs? So this report, we feel that's what Aptum has delivered to us, a set of opportunities that city can now analyze, determine, okay, what are those broad goals as we use this information that has now been done, both at the broad city level, but even at the operational departmental level at Public Works and the Public Services who deliver those services. And so really after today, after this process and the plan is finalized, the ball's going to be in our court here at the city and the stakeholders along the way to define what are those top goals and priorities, given our unique financial and operational constraints that we still have to fit in to move things forward. So just to set that context for everybody moving forward. So with that, as the last item, I definitely want to thank Christina, Charlie, and the whole team for the many hours, extra hours, quite frankly, that have gone into work on this project, and it's much appreciated by the city and definitely by me as a project manager personally. So with that, I'll turn it over to Charlie.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Mike. We're now at agenda review and desired outcomes poll. We haven't done this in a while, but I have to demonstrate that I do follow my process for Howard, my STAR facilitation training graduate. So here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to stand up and get in groups of 4. And if you've read the report, and even if you haven't, introduce yourselves if you don't know the group that you're in, and define what you would like to get out of today, our final meeting. What would you like to get out of today? And if you could do that in a group of 4 or 5, I'd appreciate it. So ready, set, go, stand up, find 3 or 4 people to talk to about what you would like to get out of today. We're going to ask, Christine and I are going to give the microphone to one person in the group about what the sense of your group was. You want to go, Jeff? Okay, Howard. Okay.
Yeah, so we had a shared, I think, general sense of wanting to see action. There's some frustration in kind of continuing the conversation. We're ready to get to work and get things done, and we hope there's kind of a shared goal or vision and support for what emerges today, because we got some work to do.
Okay, great. Pass that back to me, Jeff. This group? Stephen? Me? Yeah. You're talking to the mic for the video.
I think we would like to see more public comment, more opportunity for public discussion and comment. And as the chair of the Environmental Commission, I can say that we're going to devote the August 22nd meeting to solid waste.
Okay, great.
And principally this report.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay,
Charlie,
Ed.
our group is excited about the process. We think that hopefully there will be a resolution out of this. We, as citizens, recognize that the city loves studies, but the implications of these studies sometimes never leave the shelf that it was placed on. So we're hoping that something will come of this.
Okay, that's great. How about this group? Okay.
Well, our group had 2 retired professors here, and they felt that a political science application of the intensity of feelings towards these kinds of proposals would be appropriately addressed by having a show of hands to just informally vote about certain sections of the plan, the draft plan. And among those suggested here, but would be open to the entire group, of course, to identify, was the idea of grassroots advocacy operated by the city of Ann Arbor and the consolidated contract idea.
Great. Informal vote, have that? Yes?
So there's a lot of excitement in the group to see what's going to come up regarding the alleys and to see what kind of positive outcomes are going to come from this.
Okay, alleys and John, last person. Group?
We would like to see a clear strategic plan with clear goals, be they diversion rate goals, greenhouse gas goals, and what the actions are to meet those goals, and whether or not, if they don't, what the remaining gaps are, not only in terms of meeting those goals, but in terms of financially being able to pay for what we're proposing in terms of additional services.
All right. I think that's everyone. Thanks for participating. I appreciate it. So if we look at the desired outcomes, many of them are future forward. Let's get some action out of this. Let's have some more public discussion and review of some of the conclusions. Let's make sure that we do something with this. The alley plan, strategic plan with defined goals, a cascade of those goals. Certainly we're not going to be able to do that in these 2 hours, but it's something that could happen after in the next few months. The one we're going to address in a little bit is this request for a formal vote. But before we get into that, Christine is going to move through talking about what's happened in the project since our last meeting before we get into the plan.
First, I want to thank everybody for being here. A lot of you have been here for every meeting that we have had. It's been a big time commitment on your part. We sent you a hefty document a couple weeks ago to be able to review that tries to take all of the information that we have compiled over the course of this project and distill it into a set of writing and information and data that you can use and staff can use to be able to implement those opportunities going forward, with all of the information that's needed, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Some of it isn't that great to look at. There's a lot of cost associated with some of these options. There are decisions that are going to have to be made about how we prioritize certain opportunities, because we're not going to be able to take everything on at once. But we appreciate the opportunity to stand here and share with you where we've been in the process and get your feedback before we get to the Environmental Commission next week and start moving this towards a plan of action. Where we've been since we were here in May, we've covered an awful lot of ground. We, at that meeting, talked about having this 5th meeting, and staff immediately jumped on that and got it approved by City Council so that we could be here today with you, having this last chance for dialogue in the formal process. Certainly not the last time that I'm sure dialogue is going to happen on this, nor should it be. There was a meeting that was organized by Commissioner Brown that was held June 11th that all of the members of this committee were invited to in order to provide further discussion of the topics that we had shared in the draft recommendations that were shared at the May 21st meeting. With 2-hour meetings with a group this size, it is difficult to get through all of the information and have all that discussion. So the project team was happy to be here to participate in that, to hear that discussion firsthand. It did drive certain elements of our decision making as we formulated the final recommendations within the plan, and all of that information has been taken into consideration over the course of the last couple months. We did compile that draft solid waste resource management plan report for city staff review. And then had a couple rounds of revisions back and forth with staff before the version that's in front of you today. And when we sent that version out, Charlie asked you to send any comments, thoughts, questions that you had on it in advance of our meeting today. That was really helpful for us to be able to understand where the thinking of the group is, where there might be opportunities to strengthen some of the information that's within the plan report so that we have better documentation or more clarity on some of our recommendations. But there are a few that I want to go through just to hit on for you, for anybody that hasn't had a chance to keep up with the emails that have come in, or if you happen to be missing a couple here and there. First would be textiles collection. This was really outside of the group, and I don't know that we forwarded it to the entire group. There was a resident that was is new to the city and came across information about the solid waste resource management planning project and was reviewing the documents that we had on the website, saw the textiles collection option in there for the curbside textiles, and was very excited about it. She has had previous experience in other communities with that type of program, and she was very encouraged to see that it's an option that's being explored here. Thought that it would be a good parallel and add to the existing donation opportunities that are available rather than something that would hurt those programs. On year-round compost collection, there's satisfaction that that's included. That's something that we did have included with information on how to implement it in the organics management plan that was completed a couple of years ago. But because of the funding questions and how much we can afford to bite off for additional programs, never have been implemented. So we do have that continued support for that program. There was a question regarding the recommendation for it to be a biweekly collection. We had both biweekly and monthly as an option. The quantities are low enough, really, that we could support monthly. But the problem is that resident perception is likely to not be that different from asking them to hold it over the winter, which a lot are kind of reticent to do. So the trade-off in terms of dollars, it does double the cost, but it goes from $70,000 to $140,000, and it has a very modest impact on the greenhouse gas emission component, such that if the organics are actually captured and recovered and able to be composted, we're getting more of a greenhouse gas gain than we're losing through that additional transportation, having those trucks run through twice as often during the winter months. On the city MRF, we've talked about that. Creston talked about the process that is undergoing currently. There's definitely an understanding, I think on all sides and from all parties, that having a local processing option would be a benefit to the community, and that RFP that will be coming out is going to be driving towards making sure that we secure the most logical and available processing opportunities that we can. On Residential consolidated collection, I imagine that we'll have some further discussion on this today. There's been a strong opinion by some members of the committee that this is not an option that we should be pursuing, that consolidation is better done along the material streams as opposed to between sectors. We've continued to keep this in as a recommendation and have built the strategy around providing that as a consolidated service to the sector with city staff performing that service because of the experience of other communities. Because that is the streamlined approach that provides efficiencies for fleet, for staffing, for performance, and it provides clarity to the community. Are there different ways you can do things? You can pick a variety of different approaches. The approach that the city has used is functionally working, but the cost has gotten far out of line with where it would be if the city was performing it in-house. So on that basis, and in order to provide some retention of staff as other programs change, and to provide the efficiencies that you would gain that help to drive a strong operation and allow you to then implement other programs, we're continuing to recommend that there be a consolidation within the residential sector. On the, there was a comment about how the recommendations impact the city's sustainability objectives. I think that as we have compiled the plan, there are calculations in there of the greenhouse gas impacts. Certainly that ties to the city's sustainability objectives. But there are also sustainability goals that are related to financial sustainability. So we've identified a couple of options, including that residential consolidation that would result in cost savings compared to current conditions within the city. Again, that provides you that opportunity to seek the implementation of other programs that are sustainable, that drive the environmental performance that the city is looking for, and continue to take steps towards that loftier zero waste goal. The details of the costs and the savings and how those are calculated, all of that information is within the document through the cost of service analysis, which was used as our baseline. It's also in the discussion of each of the different options where we talk about the staff and what type of staff they would be, what classification that drives some of that cost, what equipment is needed, and then we have a financial model that models the cost impact to the solid waste fund over the course of the coming 5 years for each of the different options in isolation. That's going to be a tool that we'll talk about in a little more detail that the city can use to monitor its performance, check and see where there's an imbalance that's developing in any of its revenue related to its costs as the plan implementation continues, and be able to plan for the proper timing of the rollout of implementation steps for some of these other programs. There was a question about how we fund the implementation of recommendations. We do have funding options that are identified in funding recommendations. How each individual option gets funded, however, is going to be determined based on the conditions at that point in time, depending on the priority that's assigned to each of these programs. So if the residential consolidation is completed, we're projecting that to result in a savings of about $750,000. We may not need to seek additional funding at that point to support a program like year-round residential compost. It may pay for itself through those savings. A portion of those types of savings, though, also can be used to offset some of your costs that are more variable that hit the fund, such as the revenue that you get from the recycling. Between fiscal 18 and fiscal 19, the revenue dropped by about $450,000. For your recyclables. That's a hit against the other revenues that had been funding programs. So if we can achieve a savings of $750,000, that helps to offset that material revenue that has been lost. On education and outreach, there were some questions about what the city currently does for education and outreach and how that would be retained, changed, or eliminated with the recommendations that are in the plan. Really, in looking at it again, I realized this is an area where we need to provide a little more explanation in the plan, that what we are recommending is that the city hire somebody who has the background, the education, the expertise in community-based social marketing, which is different than an expertise in solid waste or recycling or composting or picking up material and operating trucks. that's a person who is going to be able to come in and identify what the strategies are that are best fit to the community to achieve the participation that we're looking for, compel the behavior change that we're looking for people to use these programs in the proper way and to divert more material. And with that, I think that they will be looking at what the existing services are that are provided. They'll look at a bunch of other options, and then I think the program ends up being some combination of existing plus new services. But frankly, I'm not the person to tell you what those should be because I'm not that community-based social marketing person. So that's why we have a recommendation in there to get someone who has that background and experience. We do have costs already included for what the city's current programs are. That's built into our baseline cost model because they're currently realized costs. So in terms of funding for any continuation of existing programs, that's already addressed. There are a couple more that we didn't have up here on the alleys. There was a comment about the discussions that have happened on, maybe more of like a biz model, the private businesses or the downtown businesses taking over that collection. And that's something that would still possibly be considered. One of the things that needs to happen first is there needs to be more of an inventory of the services that are in the downtown. And if there is an interest in consolidating those containers to achieve that type of a biz structure, then that inventory needs to be completed because anyone else is going to need that information. The question remains of the legal structure under which that would have to be established, who has the authority to establish it, who has the authority to participate in it, whether businesses can be part of two different biz structures or not, or if those are separately defined geographic areas. Those are all things to come as part of the implementation in order to achieve the final determination on who's the contracted entity or who's the responsible party for that. And I think that covers the majority of what I wanted to on these pre-meeting comments. There were a lot of comments that you have. We do want to provide more information on all of them. Today's meeting might not be the place to answer all of it, but we will, in one way or another, be able to address all of those. I do know Charlie wants to add one item here.
Thanks, Christina. I wanted to address the informal vote request. So throughout yesterday and even today, received a few emails requesting an informal poll or vote about certain aspects of the report. I called my new friend John Mirsky and said, I'm going to talk to you about this idea because John was one of the emailers. And I told him right off the bat, I'm against the idea of an informal poll or vote. And he said, well, why? There's a few reasons. One of the primary reasons is that this process was not set up for a recommendation to emerge from this group. In fact, it was one of the first questions I asked the city after receiving an invitation to be on the contract team. Many of you have heard of the infamous sump pump project, the sanitary sewer wet weather evaluation project that started in 2012. I was the lucky person to facilitate that project. And that project featured a directive, a request from City Council that a recommendation would emerge from what we called the CAC, the Citizen Advisory Committee. From the get-go, knowing that, the city and I and the contractor fashioned a process so that a legitimate recommendation could emerge. The selection of the people in the committee was purposeful. We wanted people that had sump pumps, that had voluntary sump pumps, that we wanted researchers from the university. We set up a separate advisory committee on climate change. We surveyed everyone in the city that had either voluntarily or involuntarily installed a sump pump. Once we had the recommendations, we fronted them in front of public meetings. We also established early on that a minority report could be developed and submitted along with the consensus or majority recommendation. That process took almost a year. We have not established that kind of setup here with you. And my fear as a facilitator is that the results of an informal poll could be interpreted by the Environmental Commission, by the city, by the public as this is what this group wants. This is the will of the of the stakeholders in this process. We have over 85 people on our stakeholder list, and we only get a small portion of that group attending these meetings, maybe 30, 35. If you take the city out, maybe 25. So asking for an informal vote on consolidation, which is what the major request has been, I think would, at least for me as a facilitator, would make the process have less integrity than it already has. And I'm very pleased with what we've done so far in terms of outreach. Now, some of you may say, well, Charlie, you did polls before. Yes, we did. We did polls on should we have another meeting? Or what would you like to talk about today? Or what should we bring back in the next meeting? Those are process polls. That's different. That's a different kettle of fish than an actual poll on do you like this? Now, I told Mr. Mirsky, if he wants to stand up right now and say, anybody that wants to participate in writing a memorandum or something like that to the project team for insertion in the plan or presentation to the Environmental Commission, go at it. But I, as a facilitator, don't feel it's appropriate for me to do an informal poll on that matter. If the city directs me to do it, you know, I'll lay on the railroad tracks. But we've talked about this before, and I think they concur with my opinion on this. Is that right, Crescent?
Yep.
Time to say right to the...
Right, Charlie.
Thank you. So, with that in mind, Christina? Yes. Yeah. Wait. Go ahead. Where's the other mic?
I'm Mike.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't really care if we poll or not.
Okay.
I think people have asked for polls because some people, myself included, feel that there's been a lot of input expressed during this process by committee members that has not been reflected in the recommendations and is not reflected in the plan. And I think the calls for a poll are simply coming from folks who are unhappy with many of the recommendations. Now, here's the thing.
Okay.
That's fine. People are often unhappy in civic affairs. I'm often unhappy. But I think one of the purposes of a good planning process is not only to create an effective plan, but to build community support for it. And I think without using the input that this committee is giving and really incorporating it into the plan, or doing something like a poll which gives you a snapshot of people's opinion about it, we lose that community support.
Okay, so what I heard you say a few things that are important to me as a facilitator. One is you feel like the many voices in the committee in opposition to some of the recommendations haven't been heard or adequately addressed in the report. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. And the other thing I heard you say is that you think it would be a great idea for public support of this plan, which is sort of obvious. Do the rest of you feel like we have, and this is a process poll, not a poll on the recommendation, how many of you feel like we have, you know, largely ignored input from the group regarding the development of this plan and what emerged? How many of you feel that way? 1, 2, 3. Okay, so we have 6 or 7 that feel that way.
Largely ignored is strong. It's a stretch for me to say
Okay, well then
largely
correct
ignored.
my language. What do you think? What's the right word?
Ignored much.
Ignored much. Okay. I think we're in the same
That's-
church. We
no,
might even
no,
be in
I
the
don't-
same pew.
I don't think so. Because there, I mean, from my point of view,
Okay.
there are priorities that need to be created in a plan, and there should be some priorities in this plan, and I think there are some that would have consensus support.
Okay.
The other parts of it, though, are extremely controversial, and I think it's in those parts, you know, not all of the plan, maybe not even a majority of it, but in those other parts, I think input has been ignored or declined.
Let me just address the the feeling of input being ignored or declined, the entire reason we were having the 5th meeting was because at the last meeting in May, 6 or 7 people said, hey, we feel we need more discussion, more dialogue on the service consolidation concept. And it's a major reason why we delivered the report to you 2 weeks early. It was a major reason why we participated, at least Christina did and Crescent did, in the meeting that Stephen Brown facilitated and ran. We have time for a couple more comments.
One of the reasons why I pushed for a meeting 5 was that I didn't believe we had sufficient information coming out of meeting 4 providing support for the recommendations. The report itself now provides much more clarity in terms of the recommendations, the rationale, the basis for it, and so on. Second, this is not an accidental committee. It was put together very consciously to represent a group of stakeholders. And I recognize that you have met with 80 others or whatever the case might be, but the groups that are represented here in this room have met on at least 5 different, I wasn't able to be at all 5, but on 5 different occasions. We've had, I suspect, much more conversation than an interview that you might have had or a focus group with a small number of people that might have lasted 2 hours. I suspect that we are much more familiar with the draft that you prepared, the rationale for the recommendations, and so on. And I was one of those former political scientists that Nancy referred to. It's common in surveys, for example, and in discussions like this, to seek some sense of intensity of feeling, intensity of preference. And I think that's what we're asking for. And I look at that list of 8 people, 8 ideas, 8 items up there, and I only see 2 that I have a particular concern about. And again, I would almost suggest that what you might do is to think in terms of, out of those 8, which ones appear to the group to be particularly of concern?
I would echo Joe's comments. I think that by and large, the report and the plan is a good one, although I do have one thing that I'll address later, hopefully. But the major concern that I have is this question of consolidated collections. And from what I understand, there's a lot of questions about some of the underlying calculations. And I think those have to absolutely be dealt with. And I'm convinced they will be before council approves it, because we're talking about $1.4 million in projected savings. And if those don't materialize, then increased services that are recommended will never, ever be able to be funded, at least from those savings. And so I think before we take any votes, people would be, or I would say we would be ill-advised to take a vote if we haven't had a chance to understand some of the underlying calculations and some of the concerns with those collections. So that's my sense.
Okay, I think we have time for only one more comment, then we need to move on with the meeting.
Very short.
Yes.
I am concerned too about some of the things that these 2 gentlemen just mentioned. And I think, and also Michael, I think one of the reasons why we haven't had the input fed back to us that we actually gave you is because the city, and I see this in this term, social marketing, has been trying to sell us a plan.
Thank you. So what I heard you say is that the city hasn't been able to define and identify the input from the committee. And I'm going to push back pretty strongly on that, because I actually prepare the meeting summaries. And if you go online and read the meeting summaries, you'll find virtually every question that was asked by this committee, and I mean every question, answered one way or another, and also every opinion that was expressed in this group about the process is documented and included in Appendix A3 in the report. So that I feel pretty strongly about, that we've actually done that. But what I heard John say is that he feels like these calculations are pretty important to understand, and I know prior to the meeting I asked Christina to actually dip into that a little bit. So Christina?
So in terms of the calculations, we have two really important tools that were developed as part of this process. That's the cost of service analysis that we talked extensively about in January, and then the financial model, which is included in attachment D of the plan. That cost of service analysis is based on fiscal year 18 actual financials from the city. As we talked about, it identifies costs by function and by component of each function so that we can compare across different services where there's differences in costs and what the cost drivers are for each of those different component functions. The financial model takes that information and it projects forward what the impact would be of different changes to the assumptions or changes to programs, additions of new programs, changes to the way that costs increase or savings that might be achieved, and what that overall impact is against the fund balance on a longer term look than just a one-time snapshot of what cost on an annual basis. That we can use then to determine what the revenues are that are needed to support programs, whether we're going to have adequate funding, and be able to determine where we can time these different opportunities in the implementation process. So, when I get my water bill or my electric bill, sometimes they change the format. They give me an understanding your bill. I wanted to go through an understanding your financial model, just to hit on what the pieces of it are. The model it's an Excel-based model. City staff has the Excel model with the inputs. What you have is the printout view of the rolled up information. All of the information that's in the actual FY 2018 for the baseline is straight out of the cost of service analysis. It uses those whole numbers, those large numbers for each of those different categories. So what we have is first at the top, we give the tonnage information. This way we're able to calculate through what an impact on increasing your recycling tonnage would have on the bottom line numbers for your operating costs. We can project the impact to increasing commercial organics and establishing a program there, and it will adjust in each of those different scenarios. We next have a section on the processing fees. These are the fees that are set by the contracts that the city has. They're a tonnage-based fee that again, ties back to that tonnage that you actually recover so that we can see the impact of moving a ton from disposal to recycling or from disposal to composting. The third component is the revenues. So this breaks out what the millage amount is, what we achieve through commercial waste fees into the system, the recycling processing credit, so that's the value that the city receives from the sale of the recyclables that are recovered, and then any other revenues. These are things like interest, it's royalties from the compost facility, it's third-party credit from the transfer station that all contribute to that bottom line revenue number. And then the fourth component is the expenses by function and type. So in your attachment D for every situation, every scenario, we have the function, so residential waste, for example, the collection component, the transfer and disposal component, and then an allocated administrative component. So that collection component includes the labor, the truck, the fuel, the repair and maintenance as a rolled up item. Everything is hidden in what you see because otherwise it'd be too many rows to show. But it's all available so the city can go in and update this from year to year based on their actuals with the new performance as costs change, because not everything is going to increase at the 3% that we've built the model to assume. Some things will increase by 2.5, some might increase by 3.1. It's going to be a slight adjustment here and there. And then at the bottom of all of the expenses, we calculate the net operating surplus or deficit. So did we come out ahead or did we come out behind over the course of the year? Did we balance our revenues and expenses? After that, so that's the operational side. That's our day-to-day operations. It's how we have to plan for everything to execute our programs. But there are other things that we talked about that hit the fund balance and have an impact. So you've got financial adjustments for things like pensions and retiree benefits. You have your landfill liability. So that's all these financial adjustments or credits that are projected here. And these will vary. So you see like OPEB, that was a big one-time hit in fiscal 18. Going forward, it's going to be a buying down credit. So it was fully funded into the solid waste area. And then as time passes, it gets bought down. You get a credit back for that. Some of these numbers will change from year to year. The change in capital assets, net of debt, can't be projected because that's based on what actually happens with assets and interest rates over the course of the year, and it will vary from year to year. So that one does have to be updated annually. Then we have capital projects. And I think there was a question about this because in some of the out years, in some of the scenarios, it has an impact on the fund balance, whether it's continuing to be level, if it's kind of showing dips and peaks. So those are capital improvements that are already established within the city's SIP, capital improvement plan, and that may or may not occur on that schedule, and may or may not occur for that cost, and may or may not be fully cash funded at the time. They could instead be depreciated. So where you see one that's a larger cost, we don't have it include the year, but the drop-off station improvements are budgeted out in 2022 on that SIP. If they were to be done at that point, there's a $1.8 million that's allocated there. That might not actually be hit as a one-time expense. It might be a depreciated expense, so it would end up moving up into the expense categories. So there's pieces of this that city staff will be moving pieces around and adjusting based on the actuals that occur. And then we calculate our fund balance at the end. So the fund balance is just all of those costs added to or subtracted from your surplus or your deficit, and looking at your beginning balance and your ending balance. And what we were able to see is that things kind of have stabilized under current conditions. We're balancing revenues with expenses, it looks like, for the most part under current conditions, which is a positive thing. And we did make adjustments for the changes in the recycling revenue that have happened in fiscal 19 compared to fiscal 18. So this is already adjusted downward for lower recycling revenue.
I have a quick question to that, if I may. Previously in this forum, the statement had been made that revenue and expenses were not balanced. And so my question is there new information now which says by and large, within a couple $100,000 here or there, that we more or less are in a balanced situation, at least as if the commodity costs stay as is going forward?
Yeah, I mean, when we made that statement, that was before the model was completed, before projections were completed. So what the assumptions are that get put into some of these inflation amounts or these forward-looking amounts for some of these financial adjustments, those change over time as the city kind of zeroes in a little more on it. So working with staff, we were able to identify that those are being projected at a lower amount or at a greater amount of credit than what had been assumed previously. But when you look at go back, our operating surplus, and this is on the baseline conditions, our operating surplus isn't very large. So there's not a lot of wiggle room in there. So when you're thinking of the sustainability and you're looking at investing in new programs, this might be sufficient to sustain exactly what you're doing now. It might, but it wouldn't take much of a hiccup for that to be upside either.
That's also under the circumstances where we're not operating a MRF locally and we're not sending things to a MRF locally. We're sending everything by truck to Ohio at a significant expense. So if we were to have a local MRF option, then we would be in a better financial situation going forward, presumably.
And in a couple of months, we'll have the information to know whether that can be achieved or not. That's a market condition that the pain of the recycling processing expense, whether facilities are local or are quite a distance away, is being felt by communities all across the country. The processing costs themselves at the facility are up because lines are running at a slower rate. The material spec is so high that they need to recover, or they're not able to move the material. They're having to cover their expenses, and their expenses are going up. So that is something that we are hopeful that we can see some decrease compared to current conditions, but until those proposals come back, there's, again, no guarantee. And that's where you got to have some flexibility or some float within your financial plan to be able to absorb those higher costs should they happen. because in particular that is outside of the city's direct control, at least in large part. So then the last thing that we have in the financial model is we have a cost analysis. It breaks it down by residential program and by commercial program. So through this, we're able to look at what the resulting, costs, like on a per household basis for the residents, for example, is, and are we getting a deficit on a per household basis? Are we coming up short on our funding? Is our funding balanced between what we're paying in revenue, in fees as a homeowner or as a business owner, compared to what the services are that we're receiving and on that expense side? So for each of the different options, then we have information about how it changes compared to the baseline condition. So that's what this shows, is we can plug in a cost for the program addition. Again, this has hidden rows behind it to identify which portion of it is labor, which portion of it is equipment. We can make adjustments as we get more refined cost information, and plug that in. And what does that do to the fund balance? What does that change in our direct costs, in our deficit or our surplus per household with the introduction of a new program or a change to a program? With respect to the cost calculations, I think we need to get into that, given our time, the cost calculation for service consolidation. Well, so that's on the service consolidation, where that cost is coming in is on primarily the labor side. The labor component of that cost category was over $4 per household or per customer. It's over $2 million per year. Based on the city's cost to deliver trash service, which is an equivalent operating service, you're driving a truck, you're picking up a cart, you're tipping it into the truck. It's largely the same customer base, with the exception of the businesses that have the recycling carts, and you've got some multifamily properties that have a large number of carts. At the city's cost to perform that service, it's a significant reduction compared to the current contract price. When you carry all that through, it works out to that $750,000 in savings.
And is this open for discussion, or what's the process?
My process, man. What do you say?
No, I think this is an important point.
So my understanding is that the savings are based on a difference in cost per tip, effectively,
No.
right? Or a cost per resident.
The savings are based on the costs that are, yes, calculated back to the cost per tip.
Yes.
Or cost per customer
Okay.
is the correct way to look at it.
Right.
So the information that we used is, okay, the trash collection is this level of cost. It's numbers are going to escape me off the top of my head. Roughly $2 per customer for the labor.
Right.
Then apply that to the recycling customers, and also the improvement in the repair and maintenance on the trucks through having better operation of the fleet, the improvements that you get in the, sorry, I should have had a table for this.
Well, there's a slide that shows the comparison between the three types of collections, right? Waste,
Right.
recycling, and compost.
And
it's based on
the big difference is in that chart.
Right.
It's labor.
Right.
And it's processing.
Yep.
Processing is aside, because processing is a separate contract. It's its own animal. It's not the cost driver in the savings that would be achieved. Those savings are purely related to the labor
And
savings.
I'll pass the mic to Mike, because I think there's an underlying assumption that I think a number of us understand is potentially incorrect, and that then puts into question the savings on a per resident or tip basis.
I can probably jump the gun a little bit on that, because
Before we do that, I just want to do a facilitative thing here. So what I'm hearing you say is that according to your analysis, the labor costs for the city to take on this activity are roughly 50% of the current labor costs, correct?
approximately.
Okay, thank you.
So a couple things here. First of all, we've been discussing this whole notion of consolidation for the last, since the beginning of this process. And this is the first meeting that I've heard that the that the core reason for doing it is financial. Previously, the argument had been made that it'd be better for communication, it'd be better for outreach, it'd provide some consistency, it'd be easier to manage. I question those assumptions, but this is the first, since the report came out, it was clear that there was an argument being made that there's a financial case that you're making from consolidation, and we had this discussion in one of the recent meetings about the thing I think you were both getting at about multifamily and commercial, and I think this is one of those areas where input feels like it's being offered and not received, or maybe it's received but not incorporated into the thinking. The issue that came up in a previous meeting is that it's different service at multifamily than it is at single-family residential. It's different service at commercial than it is at residential, even if it's being done through the same routes and in the same kind of containers, through carts. I think the core difference is that there are multiple containers at a lot of carts. And in addition, I'd say that, as I understand it, the way you're computing the labor cost on recycling right now is taking the Recycle and Arbor fee and dividing it by households and months. And what I think that misses is that there's customer service that's being done there. There's education. There are other things you might refer to as administrative aspects that are being handled within that contract. They go beyond labor. And if you look at the analysis, it appears that the city's calculation of its own admin for that service, it seems to me to be quite a bit higher than it should be, and thereby inflates the recycling cost. So that's the concerns I saw with the analysis.
So let me walk through a couple of those points.
You want to summarize what he said?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm hearing is that you are viewing the labor component of cost that we're comparing between the waste and the recycling. First, there's a question as to whether it's calculated correctly. But second, that there are services in that labor under the recycling that are not reflected necessarily in the waste labor collection cost, for example. And so let me clear that up a bit, because the administrative allocation that you see on the chart that we're talking about, where we have the 3 different areas, those administrative allocations are not customer service. There is a small component of that that's customer service, but it is other administrative costs from the city. Customer service is a component of everything that the city does, and it has its own customer service cost, which a significant amount of recycling questions do come through the city. New recycling customers are set up through the city's customer service staff first before it's passed to Recycling and Arbor to provide service. So there are complementary, or in some cases duplicating, services that are having to happen, where you are having both city staff entering information and providing information, as well as Recycling and Arbor providing information. Those costs will likely stay in the same range of where they would be. The labor cost was the majority of what that contract covers, and that labor cost is the cost for a man driving a truck, picking up a cart. And the city has that same level of cost at almost a 50% reduction compared to the current contract rate. So that in itself points to a higher cost for Recycling and Arbor to perform the service than for city staff to perform it. We are not using the financial information as the basis for the recommendation. We're using the financial information as the basis for retaining the recommendation, despite the opinion of the group, of some in the group, that it is a recommendation that shouldn't be there. All of the points that drove us to it from an operational standpoint of convenience and understanding for the customer, the fleet efficiency, the staffing efficiency, those were all reasons that we even entertained it in the first place. It's kind of like when you get a, city frequently takes proposals in, and the last thing they do is open the fee proposal. You look at the cost last. You're looking at the value. You're looking at all of the benefits and the structural operational pieces first before you look at the finances. So the finances just go to continue to say, this is something that is important to be included in this plan.
Christine, can we hear from Steve?
Okay, thanks. I would First of all, from what I've been able to read out of these numbers, out of these tables that have been presented to me, that have been presented to all of us, I would share Mike's concerns. I mean, I feel the same way. I mean, for example, at the very first advisory committee meeting, the whole topic of service consolidation came up with absolutely no reasoning behind it. It was just said, hey, this is a good goal. But there wasn't, but when it was discussed, there were no arguments made in support of that. Then, a couple of meetings later, there was a projected cost savings of $350,000 for service consolidation that had not the level of detail included in the draft report that was included in other items, you know, such as other service areas. And now we're talking about $1.5 million. And to me,
It's $750,000.
well, yeah. I mean,
775,000, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So these numbers are changing on a monthly basis.
No, these
No.
numbers are being developed as the process has continued, and one of our objectives throughout this process is to provide you information that is tangible, that is hard information. We were asked to provide the meat on the bones. As the process develops, we have become more honed in to what all of the elements are, but in that interest of providing information throughout.
I understand that as an explanation. But what I'm saying is that this is reminiscent of the situation over discussions about the Solid Waste Fund from 2017 to 2018, long before I was on the Environmental Commission. Environmental Commission, I was an observer, and I could see that the numbers the city was providing for the Solid Waste Fund were fluctuating. And I would just caution everybody to make any long-term decisions based on numbers that seem to fluctuate so rapidly. And in terms of the actual numbers, in the one case that I've been able to look at, the cost per lift, if you look at the per lift numbers, the cost of collections for recycling and for and for waste collection are fairly similar, as you would expect. It's the same job. It's the same thing. If people are making the same money, if the capital equipment is maintained the same way, everything is roughly equal. So there are other things like administrative costs. The city's allocation of its own costs for recycling administration are very high, given that I know that, for example, that all questions and things like that are referred directly to the contractor. So it's not clear to me why the city's administrative costs are that high. So it just makes me unclear about the value of using these numbers that are fluctuating so rapidly to make a long-term decision. This is a 5-year planning process.
So I heard, to me, there were two major takeaways, one of which is your confidence in the numbers and how they've emerged is lacking, correct? And what you really want to make sure is that there's an apples-to-apples comparison, and that, you know, customer service, administrative, other added value functions that the contractor may be performing are actually included in this comparison. Okay. The other thing I heard was your comment about the first meeting in service consolidation. As far as I remember, service consolidation was not an objective that the city set for you, was it, Christina?
No.
Actually, I thought it emerged from the stakeholder conversations that we had. Is that correct? Could you refresh us on how you emerged with even exploring the concept?
Yeah, I mean, we, through the course of our interviews, through the course of the downtown focus group, we've been in the city for 4 years now doing work on various projects. The consistent theme has been that there is confusion about who's providing services. There is a lack of consistency of messaging between the different services that are provided, and that there is a belief within the community, various stakeholders, that that confusion comes from the fact that it's a complex system. And frankly, it doesn't have to be that complex. The standard of practice in other communities, and particularly in high diversion communities, is to have a single provider performing services within a sector, because a resident and the material they generate, whether it is trash or recycling or compost, is going to have a set out behavior that is addressed through once a week collection at the curb in their own individual container, unless they're in a multifamily complex, which may use a dumpster, which is dramatically different from what a commercial customer requires, which is sometimes more frequent service, sometimes larger containers, sometimes both of those things. So the alignment of services across the country falls to residential or commercial. We came to the city with the question, unsure of how staff would view it, can we consolidate services? It makes sense to us to look at streamlining these services by consolidating to the residential sector so that recycling is provided by the same provider as the residential trash and the residential compost. It took their buy-in to say that they could do that from an operational standpoint,
Yeah.
but it was
Okay.
the idea of the objective outside consultant to bring that in the first place.
Well, I'm a city taxpayer, and I think we're all concerned about saving money or increasing efficiencies where it's warranted. But the fact that the consolidation of collection services would be considered a single highly simplifying factor that would reduce overall costs, I think, is rather strange to me, to my knowledge. I was on the board of directors of a recycling company, and I'll tell you, and I think the fact is that these are three different operations with three different goals. Citizens just want their trash taken away out of their sight, out of their minds. Recycling, that's really the first step in a whole industrial process stream. People that, so recycling, and it all starts at collections. It all starts at collections. And then
Mr. Brown,
organic waste
I'm going to respectfully disagree with you, and it starts far before collection. It starts at the point of generation, which is the customer, the commercial business, the resident,
Yeah.
putting that material in the right container. And it even starts before that. It comes back to their buying behavior and their consumption and what they're doing and how they envision their participation in that environment.
But the problem, right. Well, let me just finish something. I'm sorry, but I'll be brief. But the thing is, see that the incentives of somebody who's collecting for waste are not the same as the incentives for people collecting recycling or compostables. And that is the key fundamental at the base of everything. I agree with you. I mean, it starts at education.
So we have time for a couple more comments on this. Christina, is there other things that you feel are important to state?
On other recommendations?
Yes.
Beyond this one? I would like to cover, I think, two more things.
Okay, well, let's hear from John, and then I believe Mike has something to say, but if you could keep it brief, I'd appreciate it. So
I have a process proposal.
Yes.
As I indicated earlier, I think there's wide agreement over most of this plan in terms of increases in services, assuming that they can be covered by costs, both on the residential side as well as the commercial side, improvements in the downtown area, et cetera. And this whole discussion is being waylaid by this one point. I would recommend that between now and the Environmental Commission meeting, that a group of us sit down and go over these cost questions in detail and discuss them and present them in the Environmental Commission, because we can sit here the whole rest of the day and talk only about this one point and not talk about what we're going to do in the downtown area or anything else. And I would only point out that I have the cost of service here, and this whole thing is based on resident or cost per household going from $5 roughly to $2.50 per household. So by half, 503 to 240 something. It was on the previous chart. It was $2.46 savings per household. That's a 50% reduction. I worked in industry for a long time. I've never seen, I see the garbage being collected and the waste and the compost and everything outside my house. I've never seen a 50% cost reduction.
So if I could ask you to cut it short,
Yes.
John, we got a couple other people.
Yes.
Okay, thank
That's
you.
my proposal, that we take this offline and talk about this in detail.
I just want to clarify, is the we the project team, or is the we some set of the stakeholders in this room?
Whoever wants to.
Okay, are you going to take the lead on that?
I'd be happy to.
Okay, so that would be after the meeting. Those that want to participate with Mr. Mursky, please let him know. Ed?
I think we've got a lot of moving parts here. I mean, I look at it very simply, speaking from the downtown, the residential component is foreign to those in the downtown. What happens out there, I don't care, just like I think Steve was saying, pick my shit up. Get the trash out of here, I don't care what it costs. That's basically what it is. I mean, we want to do things consciously as to what it's going to cost. The downtown's a completely different animal, as is the multifamily complexes. They're going to pay the going rate for whatever service they're asking for. I think we're getting lost in this conversation. If you really want to talk about it, you're really talking about the residential component and how everybody wants to fix that. Hey, great, put it up for a vote and say, hey, we want all these services. It's a dollar number. All it is.
We actually did put it up for your input when we asked you to force rank the options that we presented 3 meetings ago. Howard, you raised your hand.
I thank everyone for their input. I think what I've heard is that we want to relook at the numbers and make sure that the allocations are appropriate. I'd prefer that the independent consultant we hired do that to get it out of interest that we all hold, myself included, in terms of how those services are delivered. So certainly capturing the thoughts, the concerns about how those numbers are aligned is something that Charlie and Christine have heard today, and I'd like them to be the leads and do that so that it's not, the analysis is not muddled by perspective. Thanks.
All right.
Said one thing, Charlie.
Hey, by the way, Charlie.
Tracy, when are you going to suggest meeting number 6? I keep waiting for that.
So, following up on Ed's point, when I remember the conversation at first about consolidation, when people suggested that things were confusing, they were talking about downtown, and it is confusing downtown, and we've got real problems downtown. I do not understand why that and the issue of our recycling infrastructure are not the far and away priorities of this planning process. That's where the problems are. Not in residential sector, not in commercial sector. Things could be better, sure, but we've got problems there and maybe some solutions coming out of this process that we have consensus behind. The rest, however.
Since we have a person who hasn't spoken yet,
And I shouldn't speak because I haven't attended these meetings, and thank you all for all the work that you've done. And I agree with Ed, you're doing a great job, and you as well, Christine.
did you just say I was doing a great job?
Yeah, I did.
Wow.
So, I would just share that it's not a black and white. You know, the downtown is one animal, the residential section of Ann Arbor is another animal. In fact, this morning I started the day with another council member and resident, and what we were discussing, issues with solid waste and recycling collection services in residential areas in the student, primarily student inhabited areas of Ann Arbor. And these are neighborhoods, and we have alleys in these neighborhoods that look like your worst nightmare downtown alley, okay? So it is truly not a one-size-fits-all. The services in these neighborhoods, residential neighborhoods, are very vastly different from neighborhoods in other parts of town. So, and I presume that the costs associated with, and we have some upcoming meetings to look at how we can improve services in these areas with Mr. Lazarus and others, and because again, it's just not a one-size-fits-all issue.
Well, I feel gratified by this conversation. In our first meeting, the city asked me to develop provocative questions, and one of the provocative questions, if you remember, was about service consolidation. So obviously, it's still a provocative issue. But I'm going to ask Christina to cover 2 or 3 more important items so we can wrap up with Crescent. But before we do that, what I heard Mr. Lazarus say is he'd like the consultant to independent and final review of the cost to address the commentary today. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. Christina?
And we will be happy to do that, to share next week. So I just want to cover one last clarification on the commercial savings that were shown for the commercial consolidation. This is only a partial savings number. This is city operational cost savings, so the $660,000 in city ops savings by consolidating commercial collection. That would be, you no longer are going to have city crews, city trucks out collecting a fraction of the commercial stream. It would instead be assigned over to the commercial franchise holder. That is why we have this note, contracted cost increase to be determined. That would be subject to the next contract bidding, and that would still have a cost. So that is probably a more of a cost. There should still be some cost savings here because the efficiencies that you get with having that collection all consolidated would be greater. And when we did the cost of service, we had a cost per lift that was significantly lower on the waste management costs per lift compared to city costs per lift.
So it's not a net figure.
It's not a net figure. That's just a starting point. And that would be city operations costs, city direct costs, but contracted costs would still be a component that would have to increase.
Is it also the case that some of the things that are that some of the services that are now part of the residential recycling would move into the commercial franchise? So some of the cost savings there are going to go to the new franchise cost under this model.
Depending on how the costs would be determined to be funded. So if it's, there's costs that would be for waste collection. Historically, the city has passed costs on that through in some portion to the business when it's a trash cost. So there would be a portion of that that would be kind of accumulated within that. But then the recycling, yes, there would be some trade between that. And that brings me to what the last point was that I wanted to bring up is that with the savings that you can get through some of these other operations, going back to residential, for example, the $775,000, we can knock that down by about $500,000 because that's what we've lost in recycling revenue since we did the cost of service based on the last financial year that was completed. So $275,000 is going to fund this component, particularly the year-round residential compost collection. It would, we've got a projection in there that the bulky items would pay for themselves if there's a fee for service that's charged for that, and it would free up funding then for the education and outreach. And I think the education and outreach is probably the hallmark of this plan, should be the hallmark of this plan from a standpoint of that is where you will see behavior change, that is where you will see progress towards achieving your goals. The city has the programs in place with the exception of, I would say, commercial organics collection. The city has all of the pieces in place for a high diversion achieved. They don't have the participation from those that are generating. So putting the focus to getting it into the right container first makes it a lot less interesting about who's actually doing the pickup of that, because that's a fairly mechanical process to drive a truck and pick up a cart.
So what are the two major items you want to review before the end of the meeting?
I think that what I would like to hear is, where do you see the priorities for kickstarting this implementation? We have, several people that said that they want to see action. So where can we start seeing action? The city's already working on action with the MRF because of that contract. They're going to be working on the commercial franchise piece as well. What are the priorities for this group? Because I think Mike made reference to priorities, and the biggest priority in this shouldn't be the recycling collection. We haven't assigned priorities. So that is for this group to do, this for the Environmental Commission to do, that is for city staff to do. We're here to provide, these are the options. So I guess that's my biggest piece that I would like is the priority piece. And then if there is anything further concerns that haven't been covered that are not related to consolidation, since that's been the focus of our conversation.
Okay, well, speaking for myself and for, I think, a number of other people, I think what we're all, the major problem in town that's been recognized for years is the downtown alleys. So I think that's the problem that has been waiting far too long to get solved. So I think, and my understanding is that the DDA has their own process going on, so I'm curious about what could be done with the downtown alleys as a priority.
Yeah,
And restarting the MRF.
And
I
in
think
terms
there's
of the
a-
alleys, there are recommendations to improve those conditions in the near term by working to adjust collection schedules so that weekend collections can be performed. We think that will alleviate a lot of the concerns and do that in the near term before we get into the next commercial franchise contract. That requires some work with the unions to get that established. I think staff's already working through that process. And then beyond that, I think the consolidation of containers within the alleys is an important piece. And there have been conversations parallel to this process that I've participated in, that I know Crescent has participated in, that relate to how to move that forward. So again, that's an action item for sure that I think there is a commitment to, and if there, I guess I'd be looking for feedback. We've heard the negatives. What didn't you like? What do you like about this plan? What are the recommendations that are going to achieve your objectives? Anyone?
Yes, sir. I haven't been to all these, but I've tried to keep up with some of the reading. And wouldn't there be a separate set of financials for regional participation?
Regional participation has been a separate dog that's been going on with this. It has to have action from City Council in order to determine whether to participate in the regional authority, and the regional authority doesn't have its own objectives set yet for what particular services it would provide and what those would look like. We do have information in the plan about what the benefits would be to the city for participating in the regional authority, and in particular, having a seat at that table and determining those objectives is, I think, one of the most important pieces to that. And that would, in the long run, there should be some cost efficiencies that would be gained if you're able to share services on a regional basis.
Christina, we have Theo here from, can address
Yeah,
that.
just real quick about the.
You want to stand up so people can see you?
So Theo Egermont, Washtenaw County Public Works Manager. We did contract RRS to do some preliminary studies about what regional costs would be. And so we have that document available, which would show what a MRF and what a drop-off station addition would cost. Obviously, those would have to be updated. Property isn't included. So it's very preliminary, but that's something that, as far as responding to your comment about priorities, we have addressed that we want education and outreach as a first priority, and then we also want to expand to drop-off stations and a MRF. It's something that people are interested in. It would have to be looked at compared to the costs that they're paying for now.
And one of the things that we did talk about with staff during the review of the plan was the efficiencies in outreach funding and whether there could be some cost savings compared to what's in the draft plan. The reality is the city has a lot of its own programs that are separate from what would be offered regionally, so you would still need somebody to spearhead all of that effort. But as you roll out any kind of a campaign for outreach, you may be able to reduce some of your costs through that regional.
You have somebody else on priorities?
Yeah, my priority personally is the components that reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. And it looks to me like both of those are the year-round compost collection and the commercial organic collection.
Thank you. Anybody else on priorities? Nancy?
Well, as the consultants are looking at expenses, it would be helpful to provide some background of what are some existing staffing levels and where might be the recycling coordinator position that's yet to be filled. I mean, I know you were asked just to work on a few programs and carry them forward, but it seems like there's some other additional benchmarking that would be helpful to have exhibited there so people can get a sense of what staff exists to be able to help with these ongoing efforts. And then the last thing is with the contracts, the consolidated contracts, I hope that as the city goes out with the RFP, that they will welcome a variety of proposals that may look at just one sector of it and be able to compare the costs and the service quality and the efficiencies so that it's not just blocked into A or B that you can apply for.
Okay, thank you.
I would suggest two priorities, like I was saying, and I think they're important far and above the other things in the plan. One is the downtown services
been a huge problem. I don't think anyone argues with that. And there's some recommendations here that I think the downtown, I'm not a property owner downtown. I'm a tenant downtown. And there are certainly issues here, and that would be one for me. The second one is recycling infrastructure. You've got a different phrase for it in the document. I think it's something like diversion-related facilities. I've raised this at every meeting, but there are two that are mentioned here, and I think the language. I'm not sure if there's some intent behind this, but the language in both of them are much weaker than I would like to see. With the MRF, which has been a huge problem for Ann Arbor and for all of Southeast Michigan in terms of recycling processing capacity since it's been shut down. I mean, I think the plan should call for the MRF to be restarted and redeveloped. That's a policy issue beyond the matter of obtaining a processing contract. So that's number one. But the other thing, and I bring this up at every single meeting, the drop-off station is a major facility within our recycling infrastructure. It's been slated for replacement for 15 years. It handles almost, I think, approximately as many recycled materials per year as the commercial sector generates right now. It's a major facility used by about 40,000 people every year. The language in the recommendation calls for something like the city participating in discussions and not taking the lead on this. I think the city needs to take the lead on dealing with the drop-off station and finding a new solution for that. And it should be working with the county and with the surrounding communities and nonprofits and whoever may be out there. But the city needs to take a lead in this.
I think those are two good questions. Could you respond from your consultant perch of, how you decided to deal with the MRF, which has been raised, and the drop-off station? Why have you presented what you did in the report?
So on the MRF component, the MRF has, from the beginning of this project, we talked about whether it was going to be an element of this plan. It was determined that it was not part of the scope to study within the plan because of ongoing conversations on the regional level, uncertainty about whether the regional authority would be pursuing development of a facility, and the depression of the commodity markets and size of the city's waste or recycling stream being low enough that it makes it difficult to operate potentially at a cost-effective level for just the city's tonnage. With all of those pieces in play, it really is its own separate animal to be studied that wasn't part of the scope. We did address it in the plan.
Not part of scope.
Right. We did address it in the plan to be sure that it isn't just completely lost on somebody picking this up and wanting to know what's happening, where we have this piece of infrastructure and what are we going to do with it, but as a plan element on its own separate track. Drop-off station is very much the same condition, that it is something that the city has earmarked dollars for in some out years on a rolling basis, but has made the policy decision that they are not going to be the lead. And that would require a change in policy and direction from the city to step out and take the lead. My understanding of that is that it's because of the regional facility, and half or more of the users of the facility are not city residents. So for the city to be the one that is leading the funding to develop that facility on behalf of a broader region needs also those regional people, partners, to participate.
My input on that then is that the city should play a leadership role, even if others are taking the formal lead. And I think that's an important distinction.
That's your recommendation. Okay. Anybody else want to throw in a priority? And then we're going to have Crescent talk about next steps.
I'd like us to all step back and look at this from 30,000 feet. The last solid waste plan starts out right at the very beginning with very clear objectives. Right at the very beginning, it says our goals are to do X and Y and Z, and then it talks about how. And if you look back at that, we did not achieve any of those objectives. And I look at all of us in the room, it's our contractors, it's the city, it's the Environmental Commission, it's everybody. We did not serve our community well. Diversion rates are flat. The solid waste fund reserve went from $15 million down to $9 million. Granted, $3 million of that was OPEB, but the rest of it, when commodity markets were strong, we dropped $3 million in value. The MRF is no longer operation. We failed our community. I would like to see a plan that says what our objectives are for the next 5 years. We've been talking about the hows, but there's nothing in this plan that says our objective is to take diversion rate from X to Y. Our objective is to reduce land or waste to landfill per person or per household from A to B. Our plan is to get the solid waste fund back to whatever it might be. There is something maybe on page 51 that quotes the objectives of Washtenaw County, but that is not the objectives, in my view, of Ann Arbor. And I would like to see something that's an opening statement in the plan where all of us, including residents, can judge ourselves on are we making progress against targets. And that should apply to this, just like street condition or anything else. That is missing to me from the plan.
Okay, thank you, John. We're now going to move to Crescent talking about what's next.
Thank you, Charlie. Well, the next steps, a couple of straightforward items. The very next, I think has been mentioned, but to close the loop on it, is the August 22nd Environmental Commission meeting will be focused around this plan and working with and conversing with the commission around it. And at the end, presenting the commission with an item for them to act on, whether they act on it as presented or adjust it, but what they think of the plan and their recommendation to City Council in terms of the recommendations and the approach that's been proposed. The next item after that is scheduled and is still evolving in my mind with specifics, but certainly this is the major part of it, is the September work session with City Council. The date's escaping me, 9th, I think, but the second Monday, the Monday following the Labor Day week. Oh, yes. Thank you, Nancy, if I use our slide. September 9th, council work session. Solid waste is the topic, and certainly this plan, the recommendations, the result of Environmental Commission, but also I'm anticipating in my mind the authority, WARMA, because that's been another topic too, definitely related, but yet separate. And the topics here are, that's a topic and presentation I'm going to be working with, and certainly closely with Howard and my boss Craig on that. But this is certainly a key piece of that foundational moving forward.
Kristen, one of the things I'd like to do is manage expectations a little bit. So we heard John's request for, established targets for various elements in the solid waste arena. That isn't something that's going to be done by the 22nd, is it?
No.
Okay.
No.
So have you cogitated about when you might recommend the city take on some goal setting?
Can I jump in just from my perspective as having been tasked with developing the plan on behalf of the city? We had an active conversation with the project team internally at the beginning of the project about whether we were setting a goal for diversion. And it was identified through our stakeholder discussions early on and the number of concerns about financial sustainability and how best to take these next steps for the next 5 years, that wasn't a priority for this particular plan because the hows were important. The how do we deliver services, how do we do that cost effectively, how do we set ourselves up to have a sustainable system were the focus. So I think that an objective statement can be identified at the beginning of the plan, but it won't necessarily be the same objectives that were identified in the preceding plan, and it may not tie to a specific target on diversion, but instead may relate to what our task was to identify the operational improvements and program additions within a financially sustainable framework that would assist the city in performing its solid waste resource duties. And I think it's a simple statement like that. I'm not sure that it's going to satisfy what others are looking for, but it also wasn't what was asked for a year and a half ago.
I think you've done what you've accomplished. At least, I think you've done what you've accomplished. If I go back to the origin of what this was, I mean, this again, there's a gazillion moving parts that just keep added to this thing, and there's personal views and points that we can keep going on and on. But I think if we go back to what, at least my understanding was the original focus of this, I think we've at least accomplished those tasks. And again, we could peel back the skin of the onion and go deeper and deeper and deeper, and we probably should. But I don't know if that's the impetus of this particular one. And I appreciate what you've gone through. Can I pull any arrows out of your back that are in there right now? I mean, I'll be happy to. I got a quiver myself.
I guess, yeah. And to build off of that, Ed, and thank you for that statement, I think, and Charlie, to wrap it up, that's that next step in working with the Environmental Commission, the Solid Waste Work Group there, of, okay, as we're moving forward in these programs and advancing things and kind of righting the ship, if you will, or straightening our house, all right, now let's pin down and focus what are those measures, those goals and objectives that then as we're developing these enhanced or expanded or new programs, so that we know what to look for to be able to grab those measures and metrics going forward. So I would see that as the logical next step building off of this.
There's really a couple of ways to skin the planning cat. One is you can set the vision, we're going to go to the moon by the end of the decade, and you can drive thousands and thousands of people to accomplish that, which happened. And the other way you can create a plan is you can say, let's see what we're doing now and how we can improve it, and what people are saying about what it is we're doing and what they want done. And then you can take that information and you can develop the plan. One of the things that people strongly resist is having someone from the outside coming in and telling them what they should be doing, okay? I've been that outsider many times. It's a rare time when I'm in that role that people say, Charlie, we're so glad you're here. You're doing thinking we could have never done by ourselves, okay? I don't hear that very often. And so I think this really is an opportunity for leaders like Mr. Brown, like Mr. Mursky, like Mr. Lazarus, like our councilwoman here to, gather your troops, take a look at what's been recommended, and decide what you want to do. So, one more comment and then I'll close.
But just in terms of next steps, what I would strongly recommend would be, I see no real distinction between this long-term strategic plan and others, whereas the master plan, the Parks, Recreation, Open Space Plan, you name the city long-term strategic plan. And with all those kinds of plans, we, and I have been involved with folks in this room on developing other long-term solid waste management plans. Oh yeah, when we had a solid waste commission in years past. And an important component that I don't see on this chart is, so City Council is going to get this plan September 9th, just prior to, and we're going to discuss it. Before any recommendations would be advanced, we need to provide opportunities for broad community stakeholder input and feedback to be provided all of us before we advance any recommendations. And this was expressed as an important component to the city administrator and others when the idea of an authority first surfaced. And so that interface should be extended to the an opportunity to the entire community. Again, similar to the same kind of process we use for rolling out and adopting ultimately any, long-term plan. Thanks.
Thank you, and that was one of the first asks that came out. And our desired outcomes is more public discussion. So it's a good idea, sound idea. So I would like to go through a couple of things. Are you running the clicker or me? Okay.
Go back one slide.
Back one slide. So one of the things we asked last time, so this is like box checking about feedback. So one of the things that the city asks us to do as facilitators is check with you to see if we're succeeding in our objectives to facilitate a good stakeholder outreach program. So here are the results from the survey that we conducted at the end of last meeting. Overall, there was sufficient public engagement on the project. So that was in agreement. As a member, I felt my opinions were sought after and valued. I'd say about 50-50. During the advisory committees, the project team provided sufficient information about the project. There was strong agreement about that. The advisory committees were effectively facilitated. Most of you thought that was true. And the meeting summaries increased my understanding of what happened during the meetings and results. It was good to see that result because we put a lot of work into those meeting summaries, a lot of work into the Q&A, a lot of vetting and review of the process. So with that in mind, Creston, you've already covered what's next, correct? So are there any other comments? We're now in the public comment section. Would anyone like to make any additional comments before we adjourn? Okay, so we look forward to seeing as many of you as like to participate in the August 22nd Environmental Commission meeting. That starts at 7 at City Council Chambers. Okay, all right. Creston, you want to close?
Thank you, Charlie. And really just to repeat from my very opening remark, I really just want to thank everybody for the time and the effort and the participation that you've put into this point along the way, certain specific points. That's really helped with all of our processes, this one in particular all that I've been involved with at the city, that always ends up with a much better process and project at the end. So I just want to thank you again for helping us along the way and being a part of it. So thank you very much.